Welcome back to A Drunk History of Middle-earth. I have just been messing around with my audio. I am sat facing a different part of my office than I normally am. I've got soundproof panels on the wall, and my knees are bumping up against my wallpaper. Right, it's the big 50. Doesn't even feel real. I can't believe it. Over a year and a half into the podcast, and we're still going. Grinding it out for the love of it. XP. Got a sizable audience now, which is crazy. Like, there's people who talk to me pretty much every day, asking about the podcast, like, can you do this, can you do that, when you're doing this, when you're doing that. It's pretty surreal. Yeah, still doing it for the love, though. I think you've got to. I think with a niche like Tolkien. But what I am finding, especially with this series, there is so much woven into these topics that you really, really, really could just do. I could have a different podcast I'd record every day of the week and you'd never run out of things to talk about, because there's just so much. There's so much stuff that we talk about. Like, there's real world magic, there's history, there's linguistics. Like, all of these things by themselves could be podcasts. Anyway, right. What we're doing today, we are going to continue the magic series. Last time we covered necromancy, and now how it was closer to exorcism. So to be called a necromancer today would more closely fit what a Christian or Jewish or something of that like Abrahamic exorcist would be in the ancient world. We also talked about last time how Sauron is a shit necromancer because he doesn't do anything necromantic. How he was also the necromancer Thu, blah, 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 blah. So go back and listen. Loads of real-world esoterica in there. Today we're going to talk about elf magic. Even though, as usual, they don't call it that. Galadriel, remember, called Sam a simple cunt and gave him a wedgie when he called her magic mirror magical, even though it blatantly was. But we'll get to that later. Right. A lot of what we call elf magic is inherent arts or traits that elves are able to perform because their spirit and body are so in tandem. That's pretty much it, right? Their spirit and their body are so in tandem that they're able to achieve acts that to us are magical. Now, this is something that's going to come up time and time again. Because of whose lens we see the story through, things appear magical. And I think what Tolkien seemed to be going for, and this is just speculation, but I'd kind of hedge my bets. I'd kind of lean into this one. Magic is more about who is witnessing it as opposed to who is performing it. So, for example, I work in cybersecurity. I'm sure some of the things that I can put in place to someone who had no knowledge of a computer would seem like divination. Like I was able to scry because I'd be able to tell what someone's doing based on some arcane incantations I read from fucking Windows logs, which makes no sense to people who don't know the rituals to access this shit. Funnily enough, that makes me think of actually the Warhammer 40k with the tech priests and the way that all works. Like, it's just technology, but it's elevated into religion and magic. Which, kind of makes sense. So anyway, right, total tangent aside, magic is more about... What is magical is more about who is witnessing it than who is doing it. Like, someone who does it doesn't tend to call it magic. It's just something they do. Whereas people witnessing it, i.e. hobbits, may see it as magic. So, elves have many talents that we'd consider magical, as we know. The first one I want to go into is very important, and it wasn't until I was nearly done with this episode I realised just how significant it was for being such a small thing. Elves and their memories. That is, I'd consider as a human, that's pretty. That's one of the more magical things about elves, is that their supernatural ability to remember things. So I once remember reading that if humans were immortal, we'd go mad because our memories wouldn't be able to handle it. And we do see that now, right? So I'll give you a personal example. And Becca's not here, by the way. She took our daughter away to Blackpool for the weekend, and it's a bit of a grotty seaside town, but I think all British kids deserve a magical weekend in Blackpool, just pure fucking working class. And like some of the pictures and videos I've seen, it's been absolutely magical. Our daughter is obsessed with dinosaurs at the moment, and she's got Tony the Triceratops, who she takes, Tony with an eye, it's a girl, who she takes everywhere with her. And they were at like these the game stalls where you got like tossed a coin onto a bottle, and then Becca sent me a picture of our daughter stood up on the counter and the bloke like teaching her how to throw the rings, and it just looks absolutely amazing. There was a fireworks show, and you know, she's nearly 3, and so for Becca it's like it's a bit of a grotty getaway, but it's absolutely magical for our daughter. So they're coming back today, but I couldn't delay this episode because there was, you know, there's too much in it. But yes, Becca should return at some point. I'm sorry it's 2 episodes in a row without her, but you know, you're gonna have to deal with it. So anyway, let's go back to, I forgot where I was. Ironic memories. Let's go back to where I was, right? Elves, I think, have supernatural memories, and that if humans were immortal, we'd essentially just go mad because we wouldn't be able to remember everything. Now, I'll give you a personal example here. Probably best Becca's not here. I'm 31, right? I struggle to remember what my ex looked like, who I lived with for perhaps 4 years. We were together for 4 years. We lived together for most of that. And we broke up nearly 10 years ago. So that's nearly 10 years of, in that time, I moved to Poland for a bit. I came back. I lived in my hometown for a bit. Then I met Becca. Then me and Becca started going out with each other. Then we got engaged. We got married. We had a kid. We bought a house. Like, not in that particular order, but like all of these things happened. So like my memories were overwritten, and this is someone who you spend 4 years of your life with. But I remember her name, but I can't remember perfectly what she looked like. And that's that kind of like a scary thing at 31. Like you remember certain facts, but elves remember, it seems they remember things almost perfectly. And I'll give you an example there, but I'm sure you've all got, I'm hoping my memory isn't just really, really bad and this is signs of early onset dementia, but overwriting your experiences is a key one, right? So like, I haven't really come across elves being like, oh yeah, I fought in that battle. Oh wait, no I didn't. Oh, did I? Like they all seem to remember what they were doing when. So to be able to maintain almost perfect detail over thousands of years is a magical feat in itself. It's supernatural. Elrond talks about this at the Council of Elrond, and we get a glimpse into just how good his memory is, right? So I'm going to quote from the book. Thereupon Elrond paused a while and sighed. I remember well the splendour of their banners, he said. It recalled to me the glory of the elder days and the hosts of Beleriand, so that many great princes and captains were assembled, and yet not so many, nor so fair, as when Thangorodrim was broken, and the elves deemed that evil was ended forever. And it was not so. You remember, said Frodo, speaking his thought aloud in his astonishment. But I thought, he stammered as Elrond turned towards him, I thought that the fall of Gil-galad was a long age ago. So it was indeed, answered Elrond gravely. But my memory reaches back even to the elder days. Earendil was my sire, who was born in Gondolin before its fall, and my mother was Elwing, daughter of Dior, son of Luthien of Doriath. I have seen 3 ages in the west of the world, and many defeats and many fruitless victories. I was the herald of Gil-galad and marched with his host. I was at the battle of Dagorlad before the Black Gate of Mordor, where we had the mastery. For the spear of Gil-galad and the sword of Elendil, Aeglos and Narsil none could withstand. I beheld the last combat on the slopes of Orodruin, where Gil-galad died and Elendil fell, and Narsil broke beneath him. But Sauron himself was overthrown, and Isildur cut the ring from his hand with the hilt shard of his father's sword and took it for his own. Now, all of this is complete speculation. I mean, I hope you enjoyed my Frodo voice, by the way. I've been playing a lot of WoW recently, and we thought it'd be really funny that what if Blizzard made an enemy who's like had a really strong West Country accent, and I just can't get it out of my head. Anyway, now all of this is complete speculation to me, right? But I would say that this could give us a glimpse at just how different elf bodies are compared to humans. Like, their shit is built to last, while humans are built to expire and move on to the timeless halls. So what this comes on like on a brain level, as I was again like this podcast takes me places. I was looking up fucking brain layout. So I think that elves may have a more enduring brain or a differently designed brain, because like their hippocampus, which controls memory, is just more enduring. It doesn't wither away because like you got your hippocampus, which controls memory, in your temporal lobe, right? And I think theirs just doesn't wither away. So like you wouldn't see an elf with like dementia as they get older because their cells aren't really dying in the way that ours do, which and then you get like Alzheimer's and what have you. But as a tangent, do you think, and this is a question I'd be very keen to have in our Discord server, which is it's seen a lot more activity recently, which is it's really nice. We've got some good conversation going on. But would an elf with a traumatic brain injury have their memory impacted? Who knows? I think probably not, but I'd like to know what you think, right? Elves, I'd consider elf memory magical, right? That's the first thing we get to. But the elves themselves know that this is a feat, like it's a feat in itself, but they don't consider it their chief talent. And if we go back to one of my favourite bits of writing, the Athrobeth Finrod a Andreth, Tolkien says, this is in like the preamble of the essay, "For greater than the talent of memory was the elvish talent for making and for discovery. The elvish Fea, spirit, was above all designed to make things in cooperation with its thrower, the body." So considering they were tutored by the Valar and Maiar, and like a lot of what they did, especially the Calaquendi, the ones who were in Valinor, and then there was Círdan, actually. I think he had some tutoring and shit with Osse. Is it Osse? Oh shit! If I get that wrong, please don't kill me. In like shipbuilding and that. But elvish magic really does seem to lie in the eye of the beholder, because they were taught these things by the demigods, or the little G gods. Eru, the big G god, Maiar and Valar, little G gods. So they were operating at like such a high level, the elves, that whatever. So when you get the hobbits that come along, like some of the most humble races, that what they see is magic to them, but to the elves, it's just like, oh yeah, I was taught that. It's just again, it's We'll come on to a quote in a minute that'll make this kind of it frames it a little bit. It's not a Tolkien quote, but I think most of you listening would think this quote when you start listening to this episode. But I'll go over the difference that Tolkien made in his conception of magic and how what the elves do versus and Gandalf etc. do versus what Sauron does. Tolkien's magic in his world seems to focus more on the ends rather than the means. So like his definition of magic is or type of magic is what's the result of this? What is the result? Who suffered? Like who is impacted by this, and how are they impacted? Rather than what are you doing to do this? So like, who's the magic aimed at? If it's aimed at people and controlling them or deceiving them, it's Goetia or Goetia. So there's two types of magic. There's magia and Goetia, and I might be fucking the pronunciation up, and I'm sorry. So there's two types of magic, and I'm going to go into what they are. So there's Goetia and there's magia. Tolkien goes for the angle that neither Goetia or magia are inherently good or inherently bad, because you could make a distinction that magia, which is just like Harry Potter magic, essentially, it's high magic, that's good. Goetia, which is like subtle, it impacts your mind and your illusions and shit like that, that's bad. But it's more about who's doing it and why they're doing it. It's their motivation. So what is Goetia and magia? And like I've said, we'll go over it in a little bit more. So these were quite difficult concepts for me to grasp at first, because there doesn't seem to be much in it. But Wikipedia took me on a fucking crazy journey. So we'll cover the real world stuff first, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. Then we'll go on to the Tolkien specific stuff, right? So the word magic, mage, and magician in English comes from the Latin magus. Magus comes from an old Persian magus, with a little upside down arrow over the S. The old Persian magu comes from the Proto-Indo-European language meg or mech with an H, which means be able. I can do, I can be able. So sticking with that Proto-Indo-European, which is it's a father language, which is where a lot of our languages today stem from. The root of meg is mag, which, as well as meaning be able, means have power. So you've got meg and mag from Proto-Indo-European, which both mean to do, to have power, to be able to do something. Then Old Persian, of all places, seems to lend it to Old Sintic, which is like the ancient Chinese language. And I could not find the proper pronunciation for this because it was a letter I've literally never seen before in my fucking life. But it's Miyag. And I don't know if I'm thinking Miyag because of Mr. Miyagi from The Karate Kid, which obviously is Japanese. So I might have done a racism there. And if I have, I'm sorry. But seeing it as Miyag, I thought Miyagi because he was like a mystical teacher. I don't know. But Miyag in Old Sintic means mage or shaman. So like there's some borrowing of things going on there. Old Persian then seems to have spread. They got around the Persians. Old Persian seems to have spread to Talmudic Hebrew as Magosh, Aramaic as Amgusha, which means magician, and Chaldean Magdim, which means wisdom and philosophy. And you're probably thinking, as I was, what the fuck is Chaldean? Well, friends, let me tell you. Chaldean language is a country called Chaldea. That was a country that existed for about 400 years in the first millennium BC, before Christ. We don't do none of that common era shit here. So, but then it was absorbed into Babylonia, like ancient Babylon. So this shit's going way back. Like the origins of the root of the word magician and magic and what have you goes way back. But then we've got for this last bit, we've got Syrian, which the form of the word in Syrian is magusai, which means magicians and soothsayer. So, komasei, komasa, magusai. Around 400 to 500 years before Christ, I'm not Christian, but I'm just not fucking PC is weird. The word goetia became used in ancient Greek as a word that applied to rituals and rites that frauds carried out. So they knew the word mage, they knew the word magus, but then they got in the word goetia, and that comes from the Greek word goes, which used to be a term for healers, diviners, seers, and magicians. So it's like grouping all these people together that deal with the supernatural. They in ancient Greece, around this time, they start to take a dim view of magic, and so that this Persian magus becomes the practicer of goetia, and is looked down as an insult. So if you say to someone like, "Oh, you're a goetia," or like you do goetia, it's like you're doing the shit magic, you're doing the shit stuff. It wasn't. It was seen as an improper expression of religion. So it was like, it wasn't. So it was. They were trying to make fetch happen, but fetch was never going to happen. Was what was happening with the people who were doing goetia. So I legitimately did all this research to realize that goetia was just in ancient Greece was just a way to call people a quack. So in the same way that like you call fucking. I'm glad Becca's not here for this shit actually because she's got aunties who do it. But like when people do like fucking Reiki, and I've seen someone do fucking massage therapy over Zoom. What absolute bullshit is that? Just lay on a bed and let a woman you don't know point a camera at your bed, and a woman you don't know will just move her hands over the camera. Like, fuck you, fucking Goetian. But anyway, I think this is just the way of calling someone a quack. So you had magia, you had magic, and then you had goetia, which was the subset, which was derided, right? So all had to do with people being labelled as using bad rites or summoning daemons, or to acquire power or control otherworldly beings for their own gain. So for the next 300 years, around the Hellenistic period, so between 323 BC, when Alexander the Great died, and 30 BC, when Cleopatra the Seventh died, so that's about 300 years, this is called the Hellenistic period. And this is where a lot of magical practices became lumped in as goetia and were labelled as bad. So this is where you start to loop it all together. And the reason for this is because the Greeks had a good kind of magic that they wanted to push as a society, and then there was the bad types of magic, right? So it was the other. So the bad stuff was like astrology, divination, witchcraft, and necromancy. And necromancy is the Greek kind of necromancy, which you'll learn about if you go and listen to the last episode, which is not the same as what you'd think of as a necromancer if you haven't already listened to the other episode. But the Greeks did have a good kind of magic, and they called that theurgy, which was high magic. So that was our version of magia. We're talking about high magic versus low magic. So Theurgy for the Greeks was high magic. It was good. It was class. It was awesome. Goetia was low magic. It was shit. It was fraudulent. So anyway, that's a quick run through of the real world terms, right? We got our roots for magia. We know that Goetia then became used in relation to magia, but you then get the distinction good and bad, which we still see roughly in Tolkien, or it could be a simplistic view of it in Tolkien. So let's talk about Tolkien, but the first thing that comes up actually is C.S. Lewis, which is very interesting. So there's an essay by Eduardo Segura and Thomas Honegger, printed in Myth and Magic, Art According to the Inklings in 2007, which, my God, is nearly 20 years ago. I was listening to Fall Out Boy the other day, and I was on a Discord call with, we were raiding in WoW. Again, I'm fucking obsessed, right? We were raiding, I was listening to Fall Out Boy, and I was raid leading, and I started talking about it, and everyone was like, oh yeah, it's really old, that. And I was like, you shut your fucking mouth. You don't talk about Fall Out Boy like that. But anyway, right. They discuss in this essay how C.S. Lewis treated the two types of magia, as magia and Goetia. What was interesting was that this was talking about the Inklings, which was a group that Lewis and Tolkien both belonged to. So they would have talked about it themselves. They would have talked about the distinction. Now, there's a difference between how C.S. Lewis treats magia and Goetia and how Tolkien views it. Lewis went a bit more, funnily enough, for a guy who has a lion being killed and resurrected as an analogy for God and Jesus. He actually went, surprisingly, he went a bit deeper than Tolkien did on magic. But it pretty much tracks broadly with what Tolkien talked about in letter 155 about the difference between magia and Goetia. So magia is high magic. It's blatant magic. It's obvious magic where you're impacting the external world. So a good example of this from Tolkien would be making damp wood burst into flame, right? A guy called Daniel Stride has a blog about the essay from Eduardo and Honegger. He also cites that Gandalf uses a command word against the Balrog. You know, when he tells him to stop and he says like you cannot pass, and he tries to lock the door. Like, this is magia, and it's good magia because it's not impacting the will of anyone else. It's not trying to control someone. So Gandalf is erecting a barrier. He's not trying to impact the Balrog's mind, right? So morally, there we've got that distinction. That morally, it's okay to use magic here, because you're not fucking with the free will of someone else. But then we've got the Goetian magic mixed with magia. There's going to be a lot of that where it's mixed types together, where Sauron forging and using the One Ring is morally not okay because he's enslaving people to his will. So that's bad magic where it's messing about with people. So Goetia is about manipulating things in a certain way. Like, the distinction's odd, but it is there. So Goetian magic used by enemies is the magic used to terrorize and subjugate people by controlling their minds and wills and soul. Like, that's what you're doing with Goetian magic. It's more subtle. It's like psychological, whereas magia is you are doing things to the world, or you're doing things to people. You're not trying to... It's not insidious. It's not like illusions. It's not manipulation. But then again, I'll just give you an example. Not all Goetian magic is bad. So think of when Finrod... We'll talk about this more in a second. But if you're familiar with the first time elves encountered humans, which we covered in our Origins of Humans episode, the first time Finrod Felagund meets humans in Beleriand and he begins to sing to them, he weaves his song in such a way that the humans start to see the events from the history. Like, they see a movie play out in real life around them. It's fucking amazing. So, in summary, right, before we move on, magia, think Harry Potter type magic, blatant, obvious shit. Goetia, more subtle, impacts your psychology, fucks with your will, it might deceive you. You could call it art, but it's still illusions. But the difficult part of this, and the difficult part of what I've been doing, is that elves are so effortlessly flawless, as usual, that they just weren't able to grasp the stuff that they did as being magical to other beings. Which then makes it does make sense in a certain way, because there's a famous quote by Arthur C. Clarke, who formulated these famous 3 laws, of which the third law is the best known and most widely cited, which is, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So what's interesting about that quote is that it does ring true for Tolkien, right? So he says in an unsent letter, this is letter 155, by the way. So letter 154 and 155 come as a package. 155 is a bit of 154 that he removed and never sent because he must have looked at it and thought, oh, fuck this, it's too confusing. Because he does say that I've been far too casual about the use of magic in my works. So he does admit that there's some messed up parts of it. But he does say that, like, both good and bad people in Middle-earth generally try to live by ordinary means because the effort to do magic is just often, like, it's not worth it. Like, people who use magia, i.e. the high magic, they do it just to do it. Like, they do it for the sake of it itself, but you can achieve the same goals often easier if you have sufficient resources. So he says that the enemy, i.e. Sauron, Saruman, etc., they go for machinery to achieve, or labour, machinery or labour, to achieve the same destructive and evil effects that they would have used magia and Goetia for. So think about Saruman cutting down Fangorn Forest. Yeah? Or you think about the orcs kidnapping horses from Rohan. It's like, if you've got the means to do it without, like, magic, which could be time consuming and really difficult to obtain, then the end, it's real. Again, it comes back to what I said. It's about the end result. It's not so much about the process. It's just, what do I want at the end of this? And that's the distinction. So if you use magia, you get quite philosophical here, right? If you use magia, you generally do it for the immediacy, to reduce the gap between what you want to happen and it happening. So if we take the example of the wet wood again, right? We could wait for it to dry out before we try again. Or we could go and find some dry wood, chop that down. Or we could send out our slaves to do it. Or we could just burn their fucking house down. It would achieve the same effect. You would be getting warm by the fire. And that's the key, is that, like, if you've got the resources to do it without magic, generally in Tolkien's world, you would do it. But this does seem to be the route that Sauron takes with, like, you know, the using machinery, using slavery, whatever, like resource, labour, whatever. Tolkien explains it a little bit more, and I'll read a quote from letter 155. The magia may not be easy to come by, and at any rate, if you have a command of abundant slave labour or machinery, often only the same thing concealed, it may be as quick or quick enough to push mountains over, wreck forests, or build pyramids by such means. Of course, another factor then comes in, a moral or pathological one. The tyrants lose sight of objects, become cruel and like smashing, hurting, and defiling as such. It would no doubt be possible to defend poor Lotho's introduction of more efficient mills, but not of Sharkey and Sandyman's use of them. So again, like, he comes back to the scouring of the Shire type bit there, where, like, you know, like, nobody wanted to use magic to make the Shire put out, you know, more production for, like, war efforts and stuff like, or, like, you know, whatever the fuck Saruman wanted to use it for. But then the cruel bit is the motive. Like, Sandyman probably wanted better mills to make things more productive, but then the motive made it evil with, you know, Saruman and Ted Sandyman being bastards about it. So the last thing he says, though, about magic, as we understand it, it's an inherent power, and it shouldn't usually be attainable by humans. So it's an inherent power that elves and Maiar and Valar have. However, I'll cover this in another episode about human magic and etc., because there are some contradictions with this. And, you know, you're probably saying, like, oh, well, Aragorn was a healer, you know, like the hands of the king are the hands of a healer and stuff like that. So we'll cover that, because there are contradictions and there are kind of get-outs for that, because Aragorn is not pure human, according to Tolkien. So, you know, fair dues. It's just sometimes there's just better races, is what someone might take away from this. Not me, but I'm just saying. Unless it's the Noldor. Obviously, they are the better race, according to them. Anyway, now we know that there's broadly two types of magic in Tolkien. Let's look at some of their examples and when elves involved and call out whether it's magia or Goetia. So the first up is one of the most epic and one of the most blatant, and I've already mentioned it. It's when Finrod Felagund comes across some sleeping men. The splashing then wakes them up. No, I'm joking, right? Finrod finds the first humans in Beleriand, and he feels a love for them stir in his heart, and he wants to interact with them. And he seems to recognise them as other children of Iluvatar, because at first when he's coming across them he thinks that it's orcs, and he's like, oh shit. So anyway, he starts to sing and play music for them, and this is where the magic happens. So from the Silmarillion I'm going to read. Now men awoke and listened to Felagund as he harped and sang, and each thought that he was in some fair dream, until he saw that his fellows were awake also beside him, but they did not speak or stir while Felagund still played, because of the beauty of the music and the wonder of the song. Wisdom was in the words of the Elven King, and the hearts grew wiser that hearkened to him. For the things of which he sang, of the making of Arda, and the bliss of Aman beyond the shadows of the sea, came as clear visions before their eyes, and his elvish speech was interpreted in each mind according to its measure. So that's Goetian magic. That's illusion, right? But it's good because he's using it for art. He's not. It is maybe all art is deception, but that's another conversation I think we'd have to have over quite a few beers, because that sounds fucking deep. But he's using his Goetian magic not only for them to see the song, but also for them to understand his language. Like, they all can understand it, and that's elvish magic at work, straight up. That's Goetian magic. It's impacting their minds. That's where motive really, really matters. And it does make me wonder, though, like, could all elves do this, like, for special occasions? Because Legolas sings for the Fellowship, and it's not mentioned, and when Bilbo goes to Rivendell and he gets the tralalalali down in the valley, you know, he doesn't see any tralalalalalies. He doesn't even see any elves, you know. I reckon it's, like, probably one of the things that only high elves could do, you know, like the Calaquendi who've been to Valinor, but who knows. But it does make more sense, like, that imagine if Bilbo, every, like, Saturday night at Rivendell, you could see the battles, like, or you could see, like, the heroic deeds from the First Age, and that's why he was such a good scribe, because, like, when they tell him the story or when they sing it, he can fucking see it. Like, wow, that would be amazing. Yeah, like, any non-elf seeing that, even any, like, how could you describe that as anything other than magical? But, you know, we'll move on. It's jaw-dropping for me. The next one is still from the First Age, which obviously it's a lot more magic happens then. And this is, it's more general in that we just have references to, it's still about singing, actually. It's still about magic singing. So Felagund does this again, except in a much more direct way. This time it's magia when he sings. It's blatant magic. When Felagund sets out on a quest with Beren, son of Barahir, and one of Aragorn's ancestors, and 10 companions, so there's 12 of them all together, they're trying to retrieve a Silmaril for King Thingol as a price for Beren marrying his daughter Luthien. And these, you know, the ancestors of Aragorn, as I mentioned. And as they're travelling, Finrod sings and disguises them as all orcs with singing spells. And I'm going to read a bit of the poem for you. There's a bit of poetry coming up quite a few times, actually. And it's described as, he hangs it noisome, shuddering, then Felagund a spell did sing, of changing and of shifting shape, their ears grew hideous and agape, their mouths did start and like a fang, each tooth became as slow he sang, their gnomish raiment then they hid, and one by one behind him slid, behind a foul and goblin thing, that once was fair, an elven king. So we have some magia and some Goetia mixed in together here, because he starts singing and he may have changed them physically, but it's also partly an illusion as well. So I'd call that a mix, right? And because part of this as well is they mat down their hair, and they do genuine blackface because they rub mud all over their face to make their skin darker. There's also elements of this when Luthien, the half-elf, half-Maya, she enchants Morgoth in his court when she sings and dances for them, causing them to fall asleep so she can steal a Silmaril from his crown. She exercised power through songs, and there's other versions of it as well, where Luthien does this. Sorry, my computer turned off while I was recording. I absolutely fucking shit myself. Whew, that would have been horrible. So yeah, Luthien does this when she puts Morgoth to sleep. There's also when she's got guards around the tree where she's been grounded by her dad, where she puts them to sleep. She exercises her song through power, but it's actual magia causing it causes sleep to overcome the court. I think she may have also used magia again when, if you remember from our werewolf episode, I think, or vampires and werewolves or whatever, that she disguises her and Beren as a vampire and a werewolf to gain access to Morgoth in the first place. So she uses more disguise magic. But going back to the song of Finrod, Felagund, and Beren on their quest, they're eventually caught by Sauron or Thu, the necromancer, depending on which version you're talking about, and they have their famous song battle, which I'd go and listen to this if you can, by Clamavi de Profundis. They do a lot of Tolkien poetry as songs, and it's amazing. But I'll read a bit here, but you can go and see the full version. He chanted a song of wizardry, of piercing opening, of treachery, revealing, uncovering, betraying, then sudden Felagund their swaying, sang in answer a song of staying, resisting, battling against power, of secrets kept, strength like a tower, and trust unbroken, freedom escape, of changing and of shifting shape, of snares eluded, broken traps, imprisoning, opening, the chain that snaps. Backwards and forwards swayed their song, reeling and foundering as ever more strong. Thu's chanting swelled, Felagund fought, and all the magic and might he brought, of elfiness into his words, softly in the gloom they heard, the birds singing afar in Nargothrond, the sighing of the sea beyond the western world on sand of pearls in elven land. Then the gloom gathered, darkness growing, in Valinor the red blood flowing, beside the sea where the gnomes slew the foam riders and stealing drew their white ships with their white sails, from lamplit havens the wind wails, the wolf howls, the ravens flee, the ice mutters in the mouths of the sea, the captives sad in Angband mourn, thunder rumbles, the fires burn, a vast smoke gushes out a roar, and Felagund swoons upon the floor. So I can't be certain, but I could kind of make the argument that you could view this contest of song and wills as like a microcosm, a tiny representation of the Ainu Lindale playing out again, like two opposing, songs of power. But to me, it also seems far more of a nod to flighting or like similar poetic battles it was used in historic society. So like you'll find this shit all over medieval literature. It's a ritualistic exchange of insults, and it's been recorded as far back as the 5th century. And so like you've got Old English, Ancient Medieval, Middle English, and Norse. I first personally came across flighting when I was playing Assassin's Creed Valhalla, but that's a game, so it's probably not a source of truth. But I thought I'm familiar with the concept, and I thought it was fucking amazing. The main one that I like to pick up on is flighting exists in a Norse tale about Loki, the Norse god Loki, insulting all the gods at a feast, and he accuses them of like sexual impropriety, of doing sorcery and shit like that. And it's a poem, a 10th century poem called the Lokasenna, and he just absolutely fucking roasts him. But anyway, sorry, we'll go back to Tolkien again before I get caught in the real world, or real world mythology. So ritualistic songs of battle are nothing new, but in the battle of Felagund and Sauron, it's actual magic on display. It's the end result is Sauron winning. Felagund is captured, where he beats a werewolf to death with his own hands and then dies in the process so that Beren can escape. Pretty fucking hardcore. But so we're moving on, right? The forging of the elven rings was certainly elvish magic at work. Absolutely. Nenya fucking business, was able to be used by Galadriel to protect Lothlorien from decay and fading. And it was pretty much magia, in my opinion, because she was having a direct impact on the physical world with her power. There was no real impact on free will or the physical. There was no real impact on free will, and it wasn't an illusion. It was actually preserved, and it was holding Lothlorien in time. Although a fun horror story really would be slowly finding out that Galadriel's went fucking insane and being able to glimpse through the illusion into a hellish Lothlorien where it's all decayed and dead, and she's keeping all the elves there against their will, just like pretending to be nice, which I think would be cool as fuck. But then you've got the ring Vilya, which protects and hides the realm of Imladris, which is the one that Elrond wears. This one I'd probably lean more towards it being slightly more Goethean magic, because it's kind of an illusion to make something hidden or hard to find. Like, to keep a settlement from being discovered accidentally, to me, implies that there's something there that keeps it from being perceived. Not much can be said about the third ring, Narya, except it was meant to help Gandalf inspire and keep from the weariness of time, which obviously was Círdan at first. This suggests a mix of Goetia and magia to me. It's a lot of mix. as it does impact the mind and will of the people around it. But it's with a good motive because it's to resist tyranny. But it does lend credence to the argument that Gandalf with the one ring would be really bad because he'd make goodness seem abhorrent. The Magia part of this being resistant to time, which all rings share, I think. But I think to talk about the rings it's something I'd rather do in its own episode. But, I say that about so much. But speaking of protecting realms, though, it's not just the rings that did that. There's also Mirkwood, which Thranduil protects. There's an enchanted river that runs through it. And this is definitely Magia. Because poor Fat Bomber falls asleep for about a week in it after he gets dipped in it slightly. And he has lovely, nice dreams. So it's definitely an impact directly on the world by causing him to sleep. So I'd consider that high magic. There's also, I didn't know whether to include this. To Bilbo and the dwarves, it must have seemed like magic when as soon as they interrupted the elves' feast 3 times, within seconds they just disappeared. Like, there's a lot of moving around. Like, the elves can move around in, like, pitch dark. So that must have seemed, like, almost magical, right? Another example of let's move on to some magical objects, right? We've got the Palantiri and the lamps of the Noldor, or the Feanorian lamps. They are good examples of elvish arts that are magical in nature, pretty much everyone, right? So the Palantiri get used and mentioned in Lord of the Rings a lot as being able to view events from far away, but it depends entirely on your will. Like, you have to have the will to do it, because Aragorn could contest the will of Sauron, but Denethor was twisted and manipulated to it. So Denethor was able to see events far away, but only what Sauron was showing. But I think it's definitely Goethean magic because it was fucking with someone's will. But then there's also elements of magia as well, I guess, where you can actually see these events. I don't know, there's a lot of mix, but like you can see the elements once you understand what's there. And it was definitely Goethean magic when Denethor was being manipulated into despair. Then you've got the Feanorian lamps, which were famously used in the First Age, right? So these lamps were first created in Valinor, and they gave out a blue light within a white crystal, and it could not be extinguished by wind or water. And one of their most famous uses is elves, or particularly Noldor elves, who were captured by Morgoth, were put to work in the mines using these lamps. And that's definitely magia for sure, but it's also one of the closest ones where you could just view it as technology. Like, it's just, like a way to capture the light and keep it going. The same as like the Silmarils, right? The Silmarils were just so good that even the Valar were like, oh, fuck, this is awesome. So, no idea. No one knows what Feanor made the Silmarils out of or how he captured the light. Even the Valar were like, nah, can't do it. Nobody could do that. Then we've got the Mirror of Galadriel, which is an important one. And this is what kind of sparked this whole episode, because like Galadriel's quote, when she offers Sam and Frodo a glimpse into the mirror, which is it's the closest thing we have to scrying, I think, even more so than the Palantiri. And she says, from the book, "And you," she said, turning to Sam, "for this is what your folk would call magic, I believe, though I do not understand clearly what they mean, and they seem to use the same word for the deceits of the enemy. But this, if you will, is the magic of Galadriel. Did you not say you wish to see elf magic?" Scrying itself, so scrying is also called hydromancy. That shows up quite often in fantasy. I mean, the biggest one I can think of is in the Eragon books. It's one of the spells he learns. And in Norse mythology, which we love coming back to on this show, there was an object called the Well of Erd, which was used for the same thing. So, maybe Tolkien took inspiration from that. It's like, you never have to look far. It's like that meme of Scooby-Doo where it's like, when they pull the mask off, it's either Norse mythology, Catholicism, or Beowulf with Tolkien. Like, you just pull the mask off one after the other, and it tends to be one of them. But what really annoyed me, right, doing all this was, because the next one was like, I was going to talk about the ropes in the boats of the Galadhrim, which the ropes seem to have a will of their own. The boats are fucking light as hell, can bear heavy burdens. Then you've got the soil from Lothlorien that causes mad growth. You've got the seed of the Malon tree. I think it's a Malon tree. Someone to correct me if I'm wrong. that Sam gets from Lothlorien. But it really annoys me that Galadriel's playing really coy for someone who's fucking surrounded by more magic than anyone else in Middle-earth, it seems. The shit. One thing I wish I could talk more about as we come towards the end of this is elf healing. Elrond is renowned as a great healer, and it seems an ordinary thing for them that it tend to be elf women who are better at healing, actually, because if you dealt death, even if it was justified, it seemed to diminish your ability to heal. And normally, I don't really know how. I'm going to speculate, but I don't really know how elves were so good at healing. I found some oblique references to elves who healed using their fire or spirit to, like, I don't know, like, this is where I'm going to speculate that I don't know, maybe it was they used their fire, they used their spirit to, like, slightly touch the body or the spirit of the other person to kind of, like, encourage healing, like lend them a bit of their essence or like surround them. I could kind of see it more with Frodo's Morgul wound when Glorfindel. So Frodo feels healed, because obviously in the movies it's Arwen, but in the books we know it's Glorfindel who rescues Frodo from the Nazgul and brings him to Rivendell. It's described that as soon as Glorfindel touches Frodo's wound, like the pain recedes a bit, and then you've got obviously Elrond who can remove the splinters that are working their way towards their heart, towards his heart. And I think personally that it's them driving away the corruption of that wound in the unseen world. Like, it's their spirit against the bad shit. So I suppose you could see it as like, if it goes back to like that humors or like stuff like that, where you've got like bad humors and good humors, that there used to be like that theory in the ancient world. Maybe it's something like that. Like, it's the elven spirit, their ability to heal is their essence driving away like the malignancy, the bad stuff. Which means that maybe an elf would be quite best placed to cure cancer. Who knows? But anyway, this there's lots I've missed out. I'm sure there's loads of magic you can think about that I've just not covered. I'm still going to do other episodes. I've got the Valar and Maiar magic. I think Dwarven and Humans and Hobbit will all come under one banner because it's an interesting discussion. Although I imagine the Dwarf is actually closer to Elvish magic because of but it's going to be more... It's going to be more based in the physical world than spirit, I think. It's more about technology for the dwarves, I think. But we'll see. There's lots I've missed out, and there's loads that I wanted to bring to this episode, but I've had to kind of come here, pause it here, because it's one of those things where you could just keep going forever and ever and ever. There is things, like I mentioned earlier, like there is things that I've been looking into, like the real world magic, that it's not just episodes by itself, it could be a whole fucking podcast by itself. And there's lots of topics like that. But today, I hope you've learned some stuff. I hope you've had some fun. I hope this has been relaxing. I hope that you've had a nice time with this podcast. As always, come and talk to me on any of the social medias I'm on. I've got a Discord server you can come and chat to. We're normally talking some shit. I often ask questions while I'm researching, just like, oh, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Like... for example, we've got a very, very good member of the Discord called Nimblelim, who I've known for quite some time now, and she is fantastic at like poetry and linguistic research and stuff like that. And she was helping me figure out how to pronounce Miag with that funky little Y, and we were just digging up some sources together. There's also a lot of quite there's a lot of law-based discussion, but we also like to have the crack. So if you're interested in that kind of vibe, come and check us out. You can also find me on Instagram. Those are the two main places I am. We're also on YouTube, obviously, but wherever you can listen to your podcast, you're going to find us. And naturally, if you're listening now, you have found us. So with that, I would say goodbye. Thank you for listening. Hopefully Becca's with me for next episode, but maybe she might skip the Magic series, because I think after this we're going to have a little palate cleanser, and we're going to do the Hobbit films, where we're going to do a drunk watch of them and talk about them, I think, because they're some of her favourite films just in general. But yeah, remember that in Tolkien, magic is more about who the observer is rather than who the performer is. So bear that in mind next time you're talking about magic in Tolkien. It's who is witnessing it, and it's what they consider magic. Because chances are, if you're the one performing it, it's just some shit you do. You don't just do it. Because remember, wizard just means wise man in Tolkien. It doesn't mean what we class it as now. It just means a wise man. So even the magic and shit that they're doing is just stuff that they do. It's not, it's not anything out of their ordinary, is probably the best way to put it. It's out of their ordinary. So that is it. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you soon. Bye.